Good afternoon. And I did just check my watch to make sure it was afternoon. It seems as if we're going round the clock these days. It is my great privilege to introduce John Tien, Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, who has graciously come to Pittsburgh to deliver this keynote address. My biggest challenge in discharging that responsibility is finding the superlatives to adequately describe the Deputy Secretary's extraordinary career, which has been characterized by high achievement, broad impact, and a deep commitment to country. In fact, when you look at everything he has accomplished and thinking about human nature, it's hard to believe that there isn't a long line of people from his past waiting to try to take credit for some of what he has done. And I'm no better than those other people. So I want to first try to claim some credit for the for the city of Pittsburgh, because he lived in Squirrel Hill, also the home to the Tree of Life Synagogue, from the time he was 2 until the time he was about 11, surely formative years in his life. And then I do want to try to grab some credit for the University of Pittsburgh, too, not only for myself, but also for Chancellor Pat Gallagher, who is here today. Because it turns out that when the Deputy Secretary was a boy, his mother was the executive assistant to then Chancellor Wes Posbar. You may think I'm stretching things a bit to try to build that into any kind of claim, but just consider this. Chancellor Posbar was a West Point graduate, he was a Rhodes Scholar, and he has a room in the historic Thayer Hotel on the grounds of West Point dedicated to him. The Deputy Secretary is a graduate of West Point, a Rhodes Scholar, and has a room in the historic Thayer Hotel on the grounds of the West Point campus dedicated to him. I don't know whether we can really dismiss all of that as a mere coincidence. One thing that is especially moving about the Deputy Secretary's room in the Thayer Hotel is that it was dedicated for him many years after their graduation by his West Point classmates. The first line in their commemorative plaque identifies him as the first Asian American to serve as first captain. The top-ranked cadet in the West Point graduating class becomes the first captain and brigade commander. This honor was created in 1872. When he claimed that honor in 1987, 115 years later, he became the first Asian American to serve in that role. Presumably, that is a source of real pride for him. What is clear is that it was a source of real pride for his West Point classmates. As you read the rest of the plaque, it also is clear that his classmates were proud of the fact that he did not let that first cadet or first captain award, as important as that was, become the pinnacle of his career. Instead, he has built a life in which each year has added measurably to a string of incredible achievements. In the military, which included combat tours, in the private sector, where he held high-ranking positions focused on critical infrastructure in the financial services industry, and of course in government. His pattern of government service also stands as a sharp counterpoint to the hyper-partisanship that seems to define our country today. He served as a White House fellow in the Clinton administration and as National Security Council Director for Iraq in the administration of President George W. Bush, and as National Security Council Senior Director for Afghanistan and Pakistan during the Obama administration. Today, as you know, he is the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, working with Secretary Mayorkas, who was here last year to deliver a keynote address. The motto of the Deputy Secretary's West Point class was, "Our country we strengthen." He approaches his Department of Homeland Security responsibilities committed to that same broad mission, and it is my privilege to introduce him to you now.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that tremendously nice, gracious, innovative, and also creative. It was all true for the most part. I'm not sure it was true in terms of any of the accolades you were giving me, but in terms of the achievements, that is true. I just had a chance to meet your former Governor Corbett today, just before the ceremony or just before this speech, and I'm going to take a line from Governor Corbett. I'm going to use it a lot going into the future, especially given who's present here right now. And we were talking about his National Guard time and other things, and he said, you know, John, you know, Deputy Secretary, two of my great achievements in life, I rank them 1 and 2. First was meeting and marrying my wife, which is great, and I say that because my wife is sitting here in the audience, so good job, always listen to a governor. The second was, in all seriousness, that other point was serious. Governor Corbett will attest to that. His second point was the going through basic training as he went in as an enlisted soldier into the National Guard in the field of aviation. So, you know, I say that because, Mark, you went through a long list of my achievements, which, again, I appreciate, but really some of my greatest achievements in connecting back to being a son of Pittsburgh. A son of Pittsburgh is the fact that my father actually was at Carnegie Tech before it was Carnegie Mellon and got his PhD, so a connection through there. My youngest daughter came here back in 2013 and went to Carnegie Mellon University and graduated as a civil engineering major. And then my oldest daughter, but she came second in line, it's one of the few times, Amanda, that you've come behind your younger sister. Amanda just joined the University of Pittsburgh as about 2 years ago as a MFA student, and her husband is actually a pediatric resident at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh up there in Lawrenceville. So, yes, in terms of accomplishments, I feel, you know, great accomplishment. Number one, make sure I'm rank ordering this for the women in my life. Tracy, wife, second daughter, Pittsburgh, second daughter over to Carnegie Mellon, and then the West Point comes fourth. So I appreciate that. And I continue to be a son of Pittsburgh, a father of Pittsburgh, connected to it. And really, I am so honored to be invited here to your second annual Global Summit here for Eradicate Hate. Hats off to you, Laura Ellsworth, to Mark Nerdenberg, and to really all of you for coming here and assembling for dealing with this very important mission to literally eradicate hate. Now, I've had a chance to meet with some of you over the course of the morning, and actually I've had chances in some prior engagements outside of Pittsburgh to meet some of you as well before. It is so impressive and it is so inspiring because you are not just the advocates, you are not just the experts, you are not just the ones who are incredibly passionate about this work. For many of you, and I met some of you today, you are the survivors of these horrific acts that has created this unfortunate opportunity to have, in this mission, to have to eradicate hate. Now, I know earlier today, I was looking at your agenda and I heard some of the comments, and the phraseology is talking about the through line of these acts of racism, of bigotry, of hatred. And unfortunately, I can't go through, and you don't want to hear the laundry list, the unfortunate laundry list of all those incredible acts of hatred. But if it's from Charlottesville to Buffalo, or El Paso to Atlanta, or Poway to Oak Creek to Christ Church, or to Uvalde, I mean, again, the list is way too long. But that through line tells us, and I'm a clear-eyed realist, and you heard Mark talk about my biography, 3 combat tours in Iraq. You learn to become a clear-eyed realist about what the world looks like. And we at the Department of Homeland Security absolutely acknowledge, realize, and appreciate, in a different way that appreciate is usually used as a word, appreciate that we are dealing with an ever-evolving threat to our communities and to our nations. And again, all of you, the experts, the advocates, and those who are the survivors of these horrific acts know this more than anybody else. Mark did mention that I grew up in Squirrel Hill. And this is why we're here in Pittsburgh. You certainly know that. The horrific act that happened almost 4 years ago today, on the morning of a Shabbat, at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And I did. I grew up in Squirrel Hill. This is where my formative years were. The Tree of Life Synagogue is where my Jewish friends went to for community, for worship, for support. I remember this. You literally can't go by. You guys all know this. It's a tremendous edifice, and it was literally in our lives constantly. I went to events at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And now we have to stand here, and we have to talk about what happened there. We don't want to necessarily, but we know we must. There's both the empirical, can we do it? And there's also the normative, should we do it? And we should do it. Why? Because of the need to do exactly what this conference is trying to accomplish, what this summit is trying to accomplish. I had a chance to speak, and it's the first time I've met him, Rabbi Jeffrey Myers, who I know is in the audience, and we had a really good discussion. We had a bit of a round table, and one of the things, and I asked Rabbi Jeffrey if it was okay to quote him, and he said it was, especially, and this of course is the spirit of the kind of person Rabbi Jeffrey is, and I'm already seeing some nodding heads, so you already know this about Rabbi Jeffrey. He says, if it helps. And I think the way he said it as a survivor makes so much sense. He says, I don't want to be a member of this club, this survivor club, but I know I must be. I don't want to be a member of this club, but I know I must be. This is why I look to Laura and I look to Mark and to all of you. Why, when I looked at the belief statement for the summit on the website, it says that unified action will combat hate. Unified action will combat hate. And I think the spirit, as Laura was talking to me about earlier today, of bringing all of you together, giving all of us, whether it's Department of Homeland Security, whether it's the state police, I had a chance to meet Jeff Fisher today, whether it's the JCC, and I met Rabbi Ron earlier today, coming together and learning from each other and combining and creating a new community. Now, Rabbi Jeffrey did say Columbine was 21 years ago. You would have think we would have learned more from that, but we're obviously seeing this uptick, and it's really, it feels exponential versus incremental, and so we must be prepared. One of the things that one of the earlier speakers, the special advisor to the UN on genocide, Alice, said, I was listening in the back there, she said, if the deniers can unite, then why can't we? So again, to Laura, to Mark, to all of you, so good of you to come together and learn from each other, listen to each other, and create not necessarily a new community, because I know you've been together for a while, and this is the second annual summit, but a really strong and vibrant one to learn from each other. Indeed, that's why we are here at the Department of Homeland Security, are here literally in force. I'm joined in this room, and I'll be joined in plenaries throughout the rest of this conference by a lot of senior leaders here. One of them is a daughter of Pittsburgh, the Deputy Chief of Staff for the department, Mary Ellen Callahan. I think she would probably lean a little more Pitt than CMU or Duquesne or Carlow or any other great universities here, because she's a Pitt graduate. She'll let you know that in the first 7 seconds of meeting her. So you have the Deputy Chief of Staff, Mary Ellen Callahan, here. We have the Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism here, Samantha Vinograd. She's leading a couple of plenary sessions. We have the Assistant Secretary for Office of Partnership and Engagement here, Brenda Abdallah, who many of you already know. So the Department of Homeland Security is here in force, and we look forward to partnering with you. Now, Mark had mentioned that Secretary Mayorkas was here last year. He gave a virtual speech because of some things had to keep him in Washington, D.C. at the time. It was actually COVID, just to be clear, right? So it was, and it actually put all of us into quarantine. The secretary emerged fine. He's a very robust guy, but he was one of the things he couldn't do was actually come here, but he wanted to be. When I spoke to Ali about 2 days ago, and he said, John, safe travels to Pittsburgh. I'm so glad that you're doing the Eradicate Hate Global Summit. Spoke there last year, because really, John, this is so emblematic of what it means to be in the Department of Homeland Security. Secretary Mayorkas likes to say that the Department of Homeland Security is a department of partnerships. It's a department of partnerships. We know that, right? Because we represent all of you, all of the 50 states of the United States of America, all the local communities, all the territories, all the tribes. We know that we have to connect to all of you, and that means that we're also connecting to nonprofit groups, to places of worship, to schools, to local police departments, to state police departments, and things of that nature. So it's with that I'd like to spend the next few minutes talking about the ways that we as a department are trying to partner with you, and we look forward to partnering with you, and that's why we're here, to learn from you and to partner with you and to hear your concerns. Again, I had a chance to meet with some of the folks who have been here really, I guess, for the past day or so, and we've heard some of their concerns, and we've heard some of their very good recommendations. So there's 3 things I'd like to talk about, and then I'll close after that. The first is we want you to know that the Department of Homeland Security certainly recognizes that the threat is out there. I spoke a little bit at the beginning. We acknowledge that the reality of what is happening out there, the racism, the bigotry, the hatred, is finding more and more ways to manifest itself, and in fact manifests itself in terms of targeting so many different institutions. Ones that we really felt, had some kind of protection. They don't. There is no limit, as we know. And again, I won't go through that list again, but they are faith-based institutions, Tree of Life Synagogue. They are schools, Uvalde. They are the places where we go shop every single day, Tops in Buffalo. It is there that we know the hatred will come out, and we know that there are not just lone wolves, not just actors, but there are actually groups that are out there. These are domestic violent extremist groups who have grievances, who have hatred in their heart, and they are finding ways to push these narratives out there. And one of my colleagues from California, he's in here somewhere today, used a very good word. That hatred is being archived online. That hatred is being archived online. We saw that in the through line of what you saw from the Buffalo shooter and the Tops grocery store in that incredibly horrific and evil manifesto. So this hatred is being archived online. And then finally, we also know that foreign governments, those who wish to do harm to the United States of America or certainly see us tear ourselves apart, they see that these are opportunities to divide us, to create fissures, to create or widen the fissures even more so. And so we know that's happening. And again, social media, online, whether it's the dark web or more in the open source, they are finding ways to create those fissures. Now, why did I say all of that? It's not just to admire the problem, but I think all of you would want us here at the Department of Homeland Security, and really in the Biden-Harris administration, to fully acknowledge that we understand the problem out there, that we absolutely understand the problem out there, and that we're here to partner with you and here to do something about it. So one of the first things that we need to do in a very systemic way, in a very organized way, within our authorities, is to actually collect, analyze, and disseminate the intelligence and the information about these groups, about these actors, about this hatred that is fueling all these different acts. And we do that not primarily through, but it is led by our Office of Intelligence and Analysis. We actually stood up a domestic terrorism group in the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, so important to that. But now you might say, well, intelligence and analysis, you're a military officer, does that mean it's a bunch of classified information that can't be shared? No, we fully acknowledge that, because who are we? Because the second thing we really need to do, or the third thing, I said was collect, analyze, and disseminate. That third thing that we need to do is information sharing. And so we recognize it really has to be at least law enforcement sensitive classified, or essentially unclassified, so we can get it out. But we need to do it in two ways. Number one, we have to be fast, because the information oftentimes, and you know this better than I do, can go from just an online post to an actual action of hatred that we have seen in so many different places. So we've got to get the information out fast, and we have to build a platform and a set of networks and relationships. Again, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Mark. Thank you to all here at the Eradicate Hate Global Summit for creating an even more robust community for us to be able to get this information out in an organized way on different platforms and through different networks. And as I spoke to some of the folks here earlier today, we fully take that on, right? We understand it's not as good as it can be, and so we're going to work on that, but it's so helpful to have that feedback coming straight from all of you. Now, I will tell you that information sharing is not top-down or just from the government. It is a two-way street. I recognized that earlier today when I was sitting in a roundtable, again, with about 20 of you from the conference or from the summit. It's a two-way street, so we need to hear from you. Good ideas, best practices, or perhaps intelligence and information that you need and want to share. And so with that in mind, we actually we re-stood up, we re-established something called the Faith-Based Security Advisory Council, the Faith-Based Security Advisory Council. Today at 9 a.m., we announced it. Please don't go. I can see everybody's checking phones right now, right? So don't go and check it out. But we named 25 names on there, and they come from faith-based institutions. They come from all different religions. They come from law enforcement organizations. So 25 names, 22 new names, and 3 who came from the former Faith-Based Security Advisory Council. Why is this important? Because in some ways, as I talked to the roundtable group today, they will be your representatives in many ways coming from the exact kind of organizations, nonprofit groups and groups, survivor groups, advocacy groups, who will have those best practices, those ideas, and really are the vanguard of the kind of diverse but also unified population and organizations that will inform us better and advise us, literally, the Faith-Based Security Advisory Council. So that's number one. That's the first thing I want to talk about: collect, analyze, disseminate, two-way information. The second is the department's focused on prevention. Now, obviously, Department of Homeland Security, we're going to be responsive should something happen, but like all of you, we are trying to get to the left of the event, to the far left of the event. We want to tap into the really amazing work that is done in other prevention disciplines, like suicide prevention, mental health, and how we can help people early on. Somebody from, I believe, and I'm sorry I don't remember your name, but I remember your organization really well from a couple hours ago, Parents for Peace. I loved your quote that said, "The warning signals are in the house and in the school." The warning signals are in the house and in the schools. So you certainly recognize that, and we at the Department of Homeland Security recognize that as well. We have to figure out ways, perhaps it's through grants, perhaps it's through partnerships, to connect to all of you so that we can be part of the prevention solution in the prevention equation. Let me give you a few examples about how we do that. I'm going to list off some organizations, and you can find these things online, or you can talk to Assistant Secretary Samantha Vinograd, or Assistant Secretary Brenda Abdallah, or Deputy Chief of Staff Pitt graduate Mary Ellen Callahan. So number one, as part of the U.S. Secret Service, the National Threat Assessment Center. Again, this is the Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center. They issue guides, practices, best practices about how to prepare your institutions, unfortunately for mass shootings, but also they provide really historically useful documents on mass attacks and public spaces. And in fact, we'll be releasing the next study on that. And we understand, this in fact came up from a couple different organizations earlier today, we understand how important it is to have data and actually to coalesce it on a national scalable level, and so we can feed it back on. So it comes up from state and local, tribes and territories, comes through DHS, FBI, others in the federal government, and then we can disseminate it back down. And we have a lot of academics in this room who will talk about, certainly understand the power of data. So that's Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center. The second is, I've mentioned it a few times now, this is Secretary Brenda Abdallah, leads the Office of Partnership Engagement, and this is our opportunity to make sure that we are talking to these sorts of groups. It was Brenda who said to Secretary Mayorkas last year and to me this year, sir, this is where the community is. We must go to them. They might come to Washington, D.C., but we must go to them, and we must hear from them, and we must network with them to understand the best practices and to have those networks and those platforms into the communities so that we can actually understand what's happening, where the threats are, and perhaps how we can prevent them. The third one is the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center and the National Threat Evaluation Reporting Office. We call it FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. We train not just the Department of Homeland Security, Customs Border Protection, ICE, ERO, Homeland Security Investigations, but folks from across the spectrum of the federal government, as well as many state, local, territorial, and tribal organizations. And through this, we are able to actually train on things like preventing domestic violent extremism and getting into these communities early. Finally, and it's not, and this is just a list of four, pretty broad, but I think representative things that we do. We have the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships. Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships. We love acronyms in Washington, D.C. CP3, but what's really good about CP3 is that it's local, right? We put them out there with you in the cities, in the regions. We have different folks who lead in this, and what they're trying to do is bring in exactly folks like you, right? Academics, folks in the schools, folks who are parts of survivors, and say, how do we actually get to those warning signals early so that what the Parents for Peace said, which is, how do we find those warning signals because we know that they're at home in their schools, at least when talking about youth. Last year, CP3 actually started a statewide initiative to bring all of these players together, and then they're local, but then what they're actually doing at a federal level is convening state to state to state to state, and of course it can be from local organizations as well. Now, I said this is very devolution. You're like, okay, sir, sounds to me like it's very much you understand the locality of all of this. But we here within the Biden and Harris administration appreciate that we have a convening authority, and we also have a convening responsibility as well, not unlike Laura and Mark have done here on a global level. So just last week, President Biden and the Biden-Harris administration convened the United We Stand summit, literally, in Washington, D.C., just literally about a few days ago. And one of the things that Secretary Mayorkas announced there is we recognize that there's an opportunity to actually help fuel and provide support. I heard about sustainability from all of you today, too, so it can't just be for a year or 2 years or 4 years. And I think one of my new colleagues here said it's really at the 5-year mark where we start to see some of the issues come about for survivors and how hard it is. So perhaps we need even more sustainable funding. But Secretary Mayorkas just announced that we awarded from the Department of Homeland Security another $20 million on targeted violence and terrorism prevention grant program. And that's, again, focused state, local, tribal, territorial governments. And the Biden-Harris administration is pushing our outreach even more to those organizations that, quite frankly, have been on the margins. Not intentionally, but it just happens, especially organizations like historically black colleges and universities and LGBTQ organizations as well. So we've, for the first time ever, unfortunately, but fortunately going forward, we'll see it even more, we finally made grants to both HBCUs and LGBTQ. All right, the third piece, and again, I've talked about collecting, analyzing, disseminating information. I've talked about the efforts we've been around prevention. The third thing we do is we realize we could do all of these things, but the fact is that our infrastructure, literally our physical buildings are at risk. So through two big organizations, FEMA and CISA. FEMA, you all know pretty well. CISA is 2 years old in terms of branding, or that brand name, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, have several programs that actually help to build resilience. And that's a word that I heard a couple of times today about resiliency for our organizations and for our buildings. So FEMA is actually growing our nonprofit security grant program to build that resilience. And CISA, again, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, we have protective service security advisors, PSAs, in every single state, to include Puerto Rico. They also lead the Federal School Safety Clearinghouse organization. So we're trying to create this, not quite one-stop shopping, but we are trying to create organizations where you can plug into and you can learn. Perhaps it will be learning from all of you as we create this new network with all of you, and then feed it back through others, because unfortunately you are not going to be the only communities who have had to deal with this, or perhaps going into the future. Lastly, I'll say on that piece, the Biden-Harris administration, it's interesting, I heard about this. They said it's very confusing, Deputy Secretary, heard this just this morning, to like, who do we actually talk to? There's not quite a clear belly button here. It's not an excuse, it's more of an understanding. We're actually going to create, later this fall in the Biden administration, a federal online portal to where you can come in, and that will be, the focus on that will be a one-stop shopping, but it'll be so important for us to come back and get a feedback loop with all of you to hear whether or not that kind of portal works. So in closing, number one, thanks to Mark, thanks to Laura, thanks to all of you for what you do. You know that we must come together to work in order to actually achieve this mission, through unified action, we can combat hate. We need to do it together. We need to be clear-eyed. We need to be focused on and persistent on what these threats are, and then we actually have to take action. As I look around this room today, literally, I look around this room today, as I looked around the round table that I was in today, I know that I'm in a room of survivors. I know that I'm in a room of advocates. I know that I'm in a room of experts. And quite honestly, I know, because of the fact that you took this proactive step, that I am in a room of heroes in this community who are going to ensure that we will eradicate hate, not just in the United States of America, but in the world. So thanks again for having us all here from DHS.